the Hunger Games prequel. We had 4 movies that came out in the early 2010s, right? 2010s? 2010s would be the 2000s if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But that is when the books came out. My fiance read all the books. We have seen all the movies together.
Did she read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes as well?
Yeah, right before the movie. So
Wow.
she knew everything that was happening. She was just spoiling the movie, right? You know, like I didn't wait for the movie. And
Yeah.
she's telling me everything that's happening. But it's interesting because that's a book that came out in 2020. So it's like well past all of the other books. And, you know, there's an interesting take about should they have made this into a miniseries with how big it is? Are there going to be more installments? But it's weird because The Hunger Games is making fun of the idea of putting so much stuff out there, this media where kids are destroying themselves in order to make the most money on an annual basis. So making too many of these would be contradictory to the story that it's telling. But I think there's a reason that they needed to make this one. It's the story of Coriolanus, because I kept saying Cornelius for the longest time. Coriolanus Snow, as you can see right there, before he becomes the president, 64 years before the start of the Hunger Games that we know with Katniss Everdeen, he was actually just, you know, a little poor boy who was going to the university until they switched things up on him right when he was about to get a scholarship. And it turns out that he now needs to be a mentor, something that we know from the old present, future Hunger Games, that they need to kind of be with the tributes in order to help them by sending in drones and supplies, sponsorships, you know, your regular YouTube stuff that you have to deal with on a daily basis.
Right.
And
this is like he's the Woody Harrelson to Jennifer Lawrence's Katniss, right? Like the one guiding Rachel Zegler through the games, hoping to help her win or survive them at the very least.
Maybe even fall in love. But in that, something along the way radicalizes him and he becomes the dictator. I've been saying it's, you know, your average story of your heartthrob to dictator pipeline that you have here.
Yeah, I've been calling it young hot Hitler.
There you go. What did you think of this movie, having seen it in theaters, and do you recommend it?
You know, I think it's an interesting and ambitious movie, albeit not entirely successful one. I think there's a lot that merits recommending about it, but ultimately I think there's just some elements of it that dragged it down a bit for me. And you mentioned the length of it, right? Because they are adapting a pretty lengthy book into a decently lengthy movie, but even at 2.5 hours, it still feels like they're kind of like just skirting the surface of a lot of things and moving the plot along for convenience sake rather than letting everything, you know, marinate and sit. Like, it does feel like they could have probably made this into at least 2 movies if they so chose. And
Mockingjay failed, though. I think that was a big reason to not do that. But a miniseries.
Or a miniseries or something like that.
There's a lot in the book.
Exactly. And the problem is it ends up falling into similar territory that I think a lot of like the Harry Potter movies fell into, right? Where there's interesting stuff there and there's moments that are obviously iconic, but if you are a person who was like familiar with the books, you know about all this stuff that's missing, and you kind of feel like you're getting the abridged version. And I do feel like this feels a bit too much like the abridged version of the story of the beginning of the Hunger Games. Then it feels, you know, like a new entry point into the world, or I don't know. So there's elements of it that I liked less. I think parts of the plot are clunky, but it's also like it's a pretty immersive and interesting world. You know, they sketch out a pretty like full idea of this dystopia, and they have all these different characters that, you know, occupy different roles in the world. And I don't know, I liked all those elements of it. I just wish I wish it felt a little bit more fully realized, I guess.
Yeah, I can see right here in the chat you were mentioning the idea of it not being realized for its characters, but when it comes to having to see the other movies, as they're mentioning in the chat, I don't think you need to see anything else. This is a movie where you'll understand everything going in because it's supposed to be a prequel. There are a couple of nods to the future. Some are pretty goofy. Some of them don't really build up to anything, but it actually helps you watching this movie to understand why his character is the way he is in the future. But like Zach said, that third act especially needed to be fleshed out more. Like, this man turns on a dime, and I think that's where it could have been better. I see Jay saying it over here. I call him the same thing. This man turns into Snow Shady at the end, but you have no reason. Like, yeah, he was raised in the trailer park, but like at a certain point, you needed a little bit more for when he falls down that rabbit hole, and I felt that's the part that they rushed the most.
Yeah, and it's just those moments where you need to believe a character has been on an emotional arc, that they've changed or they've developed, that they don't really get right. You know, he's got this friend in the film. I forget the actor's name. He's Rachel Zegler's real life boyfriend.
Josh?
But there's a couple scenes in a row towards the end of the film where in one scene he's very hopeful about his new circumstances. In the scene immediately after that, he's very frustrated by his new circumstances. In the scene immediately after that, he doesn't really care about his new circumstances, and it just sort of like waffles back and forward in a way that doesn't really allow it to be believable, right? The characters are changing or suddenly taking a new perspective, not because it feels like they've been led to that point, but because it's what's needed to move the plot forward. You know, and again,
fair,
like
he's
particularly. Sure, but like you can say the same thing about the Coriolanus character, right? And that in some scenes he's like charitable and romantic and optimistic, and then suddenly he's like cynical and self-serving, and it kind of just goes back and forth between whether or not he is like working in his own self-interest or trying to actually be a good person.
Yeah, it's a big nature versus nurture story. But they don't get too deep into it with backstories that a book would be able to, because what do you know about his father after seeing the movie once?
That he was important, I guess.
Right? But he would have been abusive. So what he knows from his father is like, oh, okay, he was this general who, as his cousin tells him, you're starting to look a lot like him. Don't be like him. The opening scene has them seeing some pretty disgusting things when they were kids, because it's him and his cousin played by Hunter Schafer, who was not in this movie enough. They did her dirty. Let me see if I can pull it up over here.
She's kind of got a thankless role. She's got a thankless role to just basically be like the resounding board for Coriolanus's progression. Yeah.
But there are moments there again where, like you're saying, you need to like have read the book or really hone in on those specific moments to be like, oh, okay, all this guy sees is bad things. So the moment he finds someone who he thinks is good, played by Rachel Zegler, any of that relationship falling apart is what leads to his destruction. But it's like, we needed more time to marinate in that, especially when that's the whole point of the story. It's about a guy going down the bad path.
Yeah, exactly. And for a lot of the film, it's sort of like there's not really a hint that that's going to come. And it's especially weird. Like I saw this on opening night with a theater full of teenagers and seeing like an entire row of girls start to squee when they got to the scene where he and Rachel Zegler kiss. In the back of my mind, knowing like this dude is going to become like a fascistic dictator by the end of this movie. Like
it's Anakin important.
Right? Like it's just a little bit weird to kind of balance those two things together. But I think it's cool. It's a cool idea to do that with one of these movies. I just don't know if it was entirely successful. And to sort of swing back to Josh's question about whether or not you need to see the other movies to understand this stuff, you don't. As you mentioned, you don't need to. But I do think that like. They would help to deepen your understanding of the world, the same way that talking about actually reading the book is. Like, there's all these elements that are just sort of like thinly alluded to or very briefly mentioned and then passed over. Like, even just the idea of like the different districts having people who are from different backgrounds, that was much more thoroughly explored in the original Hunger Games movies, is kind of just like mentioned in passing in this movie. So it's things like that make me wish, like, maybe we could have gotten the miniseries treatment, and it looks like it's making enough money that like it might merit a sequel. But like, doesn't this book not have a sequel right now?
It doesn't have a sequel, and I also think thematically it shouldn't. You know, there's some bits to the ending that I'm making an LME for, about how people are hoping for a different outcome for characters. Stuff is left ambiguous, but I think the wants and desires that people have for more sequels goes against what the series is saying. Right. It goes against what these characters represents, the themes of the movie.
I mean, that's the internal conflict at the heart of the Hunger Games, right? Like, give me more of this child violence.
Yeah, y'all don't realize you sound like the Capitol, like you're saying. There were people watching this movie, same thing for our screening, where they were like, yeah, I know he's about to be evil, but I can change him. And there's this whole concept of like, I saw some like grown reviewers, because I don't hate the movie, but like you, I do agree it's a fantastic story that could have been told better. Mm-hmm. But in that, it's interesting. We were mentioning this earlier with another review that we have coming up, that this is a movie that has two people in a very abusive relationship, especially because of the way that they're going to go down. because it's fictional, people can gravitate towards it and actually acknowledge that, sympathizing with this guy who's going to be evil, like that's a really good way to do it. And then you see them review Killers of the Flower Moon or anything else, and they can't see it there. And it's just the irony in that is crazy. So I don't expect them to not also understand that, wanting more sequels and prequels and spin-offs. And let's get a Haymitch one, which kind of interesting. But all of these different takes on this series at a certain point becomes the exact same thing that it's calling out. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what they end up doing with the franchise because in reading up, did you know the big six studios? It's always been called Warner Brothers, Sony. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but most people know them. Disney,
Paramount, Columbia. Yeah.
Lionsgate wasn't one of them, and this is what put them on the map. This series is so massive for them. Between this and Saw, it's kind of the sequels that they do need, and I think that's why they were pushing this. They had this movie in the works before the book had even come out. So.
Yeah, I mean,
there's definitely going to be a future.
Lionsgate is an interesting studio because they do a lot of like not so high budget stuff, and then they've got like one or two franchises that they use to sort of like prop them up and facilitate their ability to make other movies. But like you mentioned, they are not like one of those major ones. So it is cool that they have this hit on their hands, I guess. That all that being said, Josh in the comments is asking if you feel the length, and personally, I felt like I did feel the length. It felt longer than Killers of the Flower Moon to me, even though it's an hour shorter, 2.5 hours.
Different type of filmmaking as well.
Yeah, different type of filmmaking. But it's which I think comes back to my main issue with it in that like it both felt too long and not long enough, right? Like it's you're overstuffing your movie. If I feel like 2.5 hours wasn't enough time to get into all the things that you're sort of alluding to and trying to get there. And I think part of it, for me at least, is like what's interesting is a lot of the films, I guess maybe not a lot of the films, but at least the first couple, it's like centered on the Hunger Games. And there's a lot of this one that is centered on the Hunger Games too, but that's not really the main thrust of the movie. The main thrust of the movie is what's happening outside of the Hunger Games.
Yeah, I would argue, having seen them, that this definitely has the least Hunger Games out of all of them.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing and a bad thing, like you're saying. I think that's what's bringing people in. The first one has a big build-up before they get there. Shouldn't they be on here? What's going on? I'm going to go to Francis Lawrence, since he directed most of them. He is the same guy who had done Catching Fire and The Mockingjays. He didn't do the first Hunger Games, but he did continue working on... with Jennifer Lawrence and Red Sparrow. I'd Google it and make sure that they weren't related because they're both Lawrence. But I still think, like I'm saying, with Catching Fire, you have a whole hour-and-a-half movie. I was reading Roger Ebert's review to the first one, and he did a really great breakdown on how it focuses on the Hunger Games to the point that, like we were saying, it may be ironic because it's not getting into the themes, the politics of what makes this thing tick. Catching Fire... I think he passed, bro, before he got to see this. I think he would have loved this. The first 90 minutes is that drama he wanted. And then the moment they enter the arena in that IMAX ratio that I still remember seeing to this day, that's a whole 30 minutes in the games. The next ones end up being just the revolution. Spoiler, I guess, but it's for the older movies. The Hunger Games end up becoming the world. It no longer is the arena, but the Earth is the arena itself. So for this one being the prequel, it's kind of like building up what the Hunger Games are going to be, because it's not even this big dome that they fight in. It's a coliseum. They're kid gladiators fighting each other to the point that it's almost a little more brutal while not being as bloody. Because they're still wearing their street clothes, they're still out there fighting to a point where you're like, yo, this really is just the most barbaric way to get the Panem people to unite together after a war, which is to have this annual competition where the kids are fighting each other in the districts to teach them a lesson. Or, if you're the dictator in this movie, you learn something completely different by the end of it. I know you were saying, one of the other questions I think Magnitude had mentioned.
Yeah, what do we think about Tom Blythe and whether or not he'll be able to launch a successful career after this film? Brady compared him to Jacob Elordi in terms of somebody who could potentially compete over the same roles. They're both like in that teen heartthrob like demographic, I guess, if that's what you want to call it.
I have a different take.
Yeah, what's your take?
This is who he reminds me of. And I was thinking about it the whole movie. I'm like, is this who I think it is? Is this somebody else? I think he's a good actor. I see he's like barely starting off. He's got some roles under his belt. Mm-hmm. But then there's a series on Hulu that we're watching. and our boy pops up. And I swear he
Harris.
looks like Harris Dickinson.
He
Yes
does
or
look
no?
a little like Harris Dickinson. Yeah.
Right? Now, Harris Dickinson, I think, is going to be the one who's stealing all of his roles. Because he's just a little bit of a better actor.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that Tom Blythe like blew me away or anything with his performance here. I don't like dislike his performance at all. I just like I don't. I would need, the same way that like Jacob Elordi didn't really like take me by surprise or whatever in the kissing booth. It took like seeing him in stuff like Priscilla and the Sweet East and stuff and Saltburn to cement him as an actor that I'm interested in. I think I need to see some more benedictions before I can say the same about Tom Blythe. What about the other actors in the film? Like, obviously, this film co-stars Rachel Zegler, who's kind of been tapped as like one of the next big young starlets, and she is doing a semi-successful Southern accent in this movie. It's a little clunky,
bro. All right, let's talk about this because I know it's so massive for her online. I've been saying like she's going through her own Hunger Games on tour. I know she had filmed Snow White before this. She, funny enough, was not going to do this movie because she was like, I don't want to do back-to-back music-based things. You had mentioned it earlier. She's dating Josh, who she met on the set
West Side Story.
Of West Side Story.
Yeah.
So that's Jason. She's not dating Jason Schwartzman. She is dating Josh, who, they had this whole viral moment of them like sharing a letter on set. I'm sorry. It sounds fake to me. It sounds like part of the viral marketing for it. But, I like this guy. I think Rachel's massively talented. The only reason she took it was because she wanted a break after Snow White. Then they cast her boyfriend. And then she called him up and she said, actually, get me back on this movie. I think she's gotten better in her acting. I think she's a theater actress. And you and I know the difference between going from stage to the screen. The camera's going to be way on you. And because of that... She emotes a lot. Yeah. I liked her in Shazam because it was more of a comedy role. I thought she was really funny there. I thought it really fit. In West Side Story, I thought her acting was pushing it a little bit. I do not like her accents in this movie. I'm going to give her the praise first. Separate the art from the artist when it comes to singing. This girl has lungs. There are moments in this movie where they don't even want to give her dialogue. They just let her sing. Maybe even too much. Parts of this is like a musical. She kills every single song. There is a moment later on, because she's singing them all live, where she has this one that she dedicates to Snow. She hits this note with his name, dude. It was impeccable. Mm-hmm. But you're lying to me if you're telling me that country accent didn't make you laugh, bro. I've been hearing so many people laugh about it.
It just feels very put on. I don't even know if I necessarily think it sounds like not accurate. It just feels like a accessory,
theater kid doing a performance.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like a lot of her choices are very big. Her reactions are very, very big, and I don't know if that always serves the purpose of those scenes. Like it just adds to what feels like some of the clunkier elements to this, but that doesn't make me think she wasn't good in the movie, just maybe like not as good as she could be. And I still like her. I still think she's a dynamic and interesting performer. Like when she's on screen, I'm paying more attention. So I think there's certainly a quality to that like it should be recognized. But I would say that I thought her performance in West Side Story was better, and that the singing feels more of a piece. Okay. At least in West Side Story, because there's a couple times where it's like, everybody quiet down. Lucy Gray has something to sing.
She has to sing, right? It's pretty funny, bro. It literally just turns into a musical. Yeah. No, I think her acting is getting better. I know that there's a lot of behind the scenes with, she's getting the troll treatments as well.
Yeah, which is so dumb.
I do think she's massively talented, and I think there's going to come a point where her acting's only going to get better, and if her music gets better, I mean, she's going to be unstoppable at that point. But when compared to, like we were saying, in the older movies, like if you go back to Mockingjay, bro, you have Julianne Moore in this movie. Mm-hmm. Okay? Like, she has some delivery.
The final Philip Seymour Hoffman performance?
Bro. And that's what I was coming in here to say. Philip Seymour Hoffman has a line at the end of one of these movies. I think it's Catching Fire, when he goes, "You are the Mockingjay and you are the symbol of the resistance." Dude, it is such a line read after a week when we've been hearing, and my mother met him at the Amazon where she got bit by a spider. This man killed what should have been a terrible delivery of a line. And I'm like, wow, that's how you can make YA movies so good. These movies would have flopped if they didn't have Philip Seymour Hoffman, Julianne Moore. Whole Boogie Nights reunion right there. Right. Jeffrey freaking Wright.
Yeah.
Mahershala Ali is a side character. Let's see wherever he is put up over here. All the way at the bottom, dude.
Like 12th build.
You know? And then let's keep it a buck. Donald Sutherland, like our guy has a big thing. I don't know why not letting me pull it up. But Donald Sutherland, he plays the original Snow. So obviously he's got a lot to live up to when he's doing this performance as a young Snow, because his take on it was insane. His take on it had so much honestly now angst. There's a whole vendetta that he seeks out when he's running the Capitol. She's got a line where she goes, you don't go out in the rain. She goes, I don't melt like sugar. I pray she gets there. She will get there.
She will.
Because no one can cut into a song, like you said, as awkwardly and be like, how did we get into the music? Okay, well, it's good. She's got that power in music. One day she's going to have that power in acting.
Yeah. How about the adult performers? Was there any that stood out to you in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes?
Adult performers? Peter Dinklage is pretty decent in the movie because he's pretty much just playing the guy who's very torn that he created the Hunger Games by accident.
Yeah.
He's good. He's fine.
Yeah, he's kind of playing. He's kind of playing like season 6 Tyrion.
Yes, right. He just wants to tell a story, and with a story,
like drunk and a little bit like self-loathing
the whole time. Yeah. But I will say that Viola Davis was good in the movie because she's so over the top.
Yeah, she gets to chew the scenery, right?
Chew the scenery. She's chomping the scenery, bro. She's coming in saying so much over the top stuff. She's got like 2 different colored eyes, and that was her choice. She's playing this like crazy villain, and personally, I think she is the one manipulating everything in the movie. If you pay close attention, you don't cast someone like Viola without giving her, again, if you remember Plutarch, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, a little bit more meat in the background. But I think you and I agree, bro. Let's talk about him. This man deserves a spinoff.
He's the boy
in this movie.
He's incredible.
There's these featurettes with him because technically, do you remember Stanley Tucci in the original?
Yeah,
he's like the announcer.
Right.
This is like his like I don't know, uncle, grandpa. He's related to him in some way. He's the first person in the series who's like announcing the things for the Hunger Games. They do these. They did these featurettes where he's like doing promos for it that are not in the movie. Bro, he mops. He's mopping in these TV spots.
So
some of the
fun.
Actors in this. Yeah,
he's such a fun performer.
He was great.
Yeah.
Shout out Jason Schwartzman. He was fantastic in that. But
having an incredible year too with Spider-Verse, with Asteroid City, and now this.
Yeah, he's knocking it out of the park. But overall, I think it's a really good story. It could have been told better if it had more time because it's in that dilemma where it is too long, but also cuts every scene too short, and that's what makes it feel like it's dragging out a bit. For the fans, I think it's going to be a really big Thanksgiving movie because at this point, it's only Wish that they're competing with. I think this is going to do really good numbers at the box office, and we'll see what the future holds for it. But I would recommend it as a junior price.
Nice. Yeah, I think I'd recommend it as well, although it's, it might be something you can save for streaming, but it's not the worst time at the movie theater. I'd still recommend it.
So let us know your thoughts down below on The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.